Now, one of the reasons you wanted to do the podcast with me today had to do with an interview I did with Adrian Street probably about 3 years ago now, where, of course, he wrestled for Stampede Wrestling, for anyone that doesn't know, around 1981. But he was talking about wrestling in Germany, where he had said in this interview that he was the one that brought Brett and Jim Neidhart to Germany. And I guess he got, according to him, Keith blacklisted from Germany. And you wanted to clear something up about that. And I guess since then, he may have mentioned some other things about your family on another podcast, which I haven't heard yet. But
Yeah.
maybe you could clear this up.
Yeah. So I'll have to clarify, Devin. I heard Adrian on your podcast, and then another one that I think he did out of the States, and he made a lot of remarks about working for Stampede Wrestling and my dad in 1981, and also getting Brett and Jim booked for the Hanover tournaments in the fall of 1981. And a lot of the things he said were completely untrue. I was I was part of the industry then. I think I would have been in my early 20s, but I was at a lot of the shows. I knew a lot about the talent that was here at the time, and who was over and who wasn't. So I have a pretty accurate memory of what was going on and Adrian's experience here in Calgary. And I know a lot of the things he said were completely untrue. Maybe his memories lapsed over 40 years since he was here, or he's just very bitter and didn't have positive memories about his experience working for Calgary, working in Calgary for my dad. But I know a lot of the things he said were completely inaccurate. So the first thing you had mentioned, though, was that he had helped Brett and Jim Neidhart get booked in Hanover, Germany that year. And that wasn't true. The promoter, this Heinrich Kaiser, came over directly to Calgary on a talent scout trip, and he booked wrestlers directly himself. He did book Adrian directly himself, but anyone else he booked was through my dad. So he'd booked Adrian to be sort of his clown heel. Adrian was doing the gay heel gimmick at the time, and Heinrich thought that would be something unique, something different that could get over in his tournament. So he did book Adrian directly himself, but Brett and Jim, got booked through my dad. Adrian had nothing to do with them getting booked. He said Brett had asked him as a favor if he could use his connections to get him booked with Kaiser in Germany. And Adrian said he liked Brett, said he would do what he could for him. And then Brett asked as a favor if he could book Jim Neidhart over. And Jim at the time was married to my sister Ellie. And that simply wasn't true. Brett and Jim got directly booked through Kaiser with my dad, and Adrian didn't use any of his own connections to get them booked there. He also said that my brother Keith asked him as a favor if he could get booked over there through Adrian, and Adrian didn't have a good relationship with Keith. They didn't get along very well. They had wrestled during the spring of 1981, and Keith was the Commonwealth junior heavyweight champion, and he worked a short program with Adrian, and their styles didn't mesh very well in the ring. Adrian's offense was pretty limited, and he didn't like selling or taking a lot of bumps, so Keith just didn't give him much in the match, and really just kind of guzzled Adrian. And so I think Adrian was pretty bitter at Keith about that, but Keith had never asked him about getting booked in Germany, and Adrian claimed that Keith, he told Keith, "I don't like you, and I wouldn't do anything to help you get booked in Germany." But they never ever had that conversation. That never ever took place. And Keith, he'd worked for Edmund Schober, who was the previous promoter in Hanover, like 2 years ago. He went over like in the fall of 1979. And that was it. That was his only tour there. But Adrian claimed that after Keith couldn't get booked through him, he flew himself over to Germany, paid his own airfare and his own accommodations, and worked on the shows there. And that wasn't true at all. Keith never even went over to Germany that year. And if I recall, he had just started working for the fire department. He was working full time for them, and he wasn't even interested in going on any overseas tours. Aside from Germany and Japan a few years before, Keith was just wrestling locally. In fact, I think he even went to the Maritimes that summer. He worked for Emile Dupre that summer, but he was already working full time for the fire department, which became his career. And then he would just wrestle local shows in Calgary and Edmonton on the Stampede promotion. So Adrian's remarks about Keith wanting to get booked in Germany and approaching him personally and getting snubbed by Adrian because he didn't like him, and then flying himself over because he was that desperate to work there, were simply untrue. Those things never happened.
And you mentioned there was some other remarks you made on another podcast that were also not true. Do you recall what those were about?
Yeah, Adrian referred to my dad basically as sort of a sadistic bully who handpicked unsuspecting marks and lured them into the dungeon to take advantage of them and torture and embarrass them, but that these guys had no idea what was going to happen to them when they got into the gym, and that my dad was just sort of preying on them and taking advantage of their inexperience, I guess, or naivety. But to set the record straight, Adrian was never even at the dungeon. I don't believe he was even ever at the house during his stay in Calgary. So I don't know how he would make those remarks, that my dad was taking advantage of these guys and just bullying them, and was bitter and ruthless toward these guys, and just trying to punish them and embarrass them. But Adrian was never even at the house, so I don't know how he could make those remarks. But and he quoted my dad as kind of being sadistic toward them and laughing at them, and putting on a show basically for some of the other wrestlers who might be spectators. But again, he was never even at the house that I can recall, and he certainly wasn't at any of the dungeon sessions, where my dad worked out with guys wanting to train. So what he's saying is a total lapse of memory, or maybe it's just based on hearsay, but it's not from what he directly saw or experienced. But anybody who knew my dad knew that he was a very positive guy who always had a sense of humor, and he was always very inspirational with the talent around him. He wasn't mean spirited. He wasn't a bully taking advantage of guys that wanted to break in, but he set a very tough standard for anyone wanting to break in. There are a lot of guys who approached him about getting into wrestling. And a lot of them were pretty big, strong, tough specimens, that you had to kind of work around. Some of them were other amateur wrestlers or boxers or from different martial arts at the time. Others were maybe construction workers, oil rig workers, farmers, but all big, strong guys. Some well over 200 pounds, and could probably handle themselves. And so my dad didn't take them lightly, and a lot of them approached my dad about getting into wrestling, and for some of them they just saw it as something pretty easy to get into. I can go in there and do all those moves and be a big star, and be a hero with fans and attract all the female fans. And a lot of guys kind of were just looking at those aspects of getting into wrestling, just an easy doorway or connection to my dad. And that wasn't my dad's philosophy. If he saw any potential in you, and my dad didn't seek these guys out, they usually would approach him. And he trained a lot of different boys over the years, and some who went on to become pretty good workers. But in these sessions that he trained guys, he would teach them how to lock up and bowl and push each other, and then try to get a takedown from a standing position. And it was always a case of you use your best moves against mine, and my dad's experience usually prevailed. But it wasn't like where you just sort of got these guys and put them on the mat and put holds on them and took advantage of them the way Adrian made out. That's just completely untrue. But my dad was very punishing with guys. He would put them in very uncomfortable thread throughs or guillotines or double grapevines, and you didn't get out of it. My dad would put you through a torturous session for 30 or 40 minutes, or sometimes until you blacked out or you lost consciousness. But he was teaching you how to do these things, and he would let these guys uh, do these holds on him. Or if he had a few guys, quite often he only had one or two guys, but if he had a couple of guys, he would let them do the moves and apply them to each other. What my dad had taught them. And if you were strong enough to come back and you had the willpower and desire to come back, and you'd earned my dad's respect, then he would continue teaching you and make that gradual transition to mat and chain wrestling, and teach a lot of guys just survival skills and all the do's and don't do's of wrestling. And in my dad's defense, he never ever charged one guy that he trained. But he was just very passionate about protecting the business, and he didn't want guys breaking in too easily, because they wouldn't respect the industry and they wouldn't last very long. There'd be too many other older, more experienced guys that would ring them out basically and take advantage of them. And so my dad set a tough standard for them, and he trained a lot of pretty distinguished wrestlers. He either trained them or he broke them in. But everyone from George Gordienko, Luther Lindsay, Archie the Stomper Goldie, Gorilla Monsoon, and more recent years, guys like Dan Crawford and Bob Pringle, who all became pretty good workers and had successful careers. And they withstood the pace. But I think if you could interview any of them who are still alive, they would tell you that my dad wasn't a bully. He didn't just take advantage of guys, and he wanted to teach them survival skills so they could handle themselves against other more experienced wrestlers. Or if they were in a nightclub or a bar and got confronted by a fan, and if you didn't know how to look after yourself, that could be such an embarrassment for you if some fan basically kicked your ass in a nightclub or bar, or jumped you in the ring at a show, if you got heat as a heel especially. So my dad set that standard, and and he wasn't any easier on any of his sons. Like he did all these sessions with Brett and Bruce and Keith and Jim Neidhart. Jim trained with my dad, I think, on and off for a couple of years, and my dad was never easy on him. So, he set the same standards for anybody he trained with. But essentially, he was trying to teach you wrestling as a defense, and a way to protect yourself in any situation. But Devin, I also wanted to comment on a couple of things that Adrian Street had also said, regarding working in Calgary for my dad. He had mentioned that his wife and his valet, Linda, who I think many people are familiar with, came over and worked for my dad in 1981, and that Stu had underpaid her and kind of exploited her as a performer. And that's simply not true. When Adrian first got booked for Stampede, he'd used his contacts with Ted Betley, who is Dynamite and Davey Boy's trainer in England. Adrian was having trouble getting work at the time in the UK. I think he had pissed off a lot of promoters there, and he wasn't getting much work for the joint promotion or the other promotions. I think that might have been Brian Dixon and Org Williams, but basically he was persona non grata. He wasn't getting much work over there in the UK or Europe. So he had asked Ted as a favor if he could put a good word in for him with my brother Bruce, and see if he could get booked over here in Calgary, which might jumpstart his career. And we had booked quite a few guys over from the UK, including Dynamite and Davey Boy. In fact, I think Davey Boy came over 3 or 4 weeks after Adrian debuted. But also Frank Cullen, who did very well here as Robbie Stewart, and a lot of big names previously in the past, everyone from Billy Robinson to Les Thornton to Jeff Ports to Kendo Nagasaki and Black Angus. But Ted had spoken with Bruce and asked as a favor if we could get him booked here. And Bruce said, okay. And Bruce thought he might be able to get Adrian over as sort of a gay heel, which was something that was pretty successful in a lot of other territories, especially with Gorgeous George. So nowadays that wouldn't be so appropriate, I guess, but it was then. So my dad did book Adrian here, but Adrian never negotiated with my dad for Linda to come over as a valet. At the time, my dad already had two managers. He had John Foley and Jude Rosenblum as managers, and a full roster. A lot of expensive talent that he was paying. Everyone from David Schultz to Leo Burke to Dynamite. Who was making a lot of money at the time and well deserved. Those guys worked hard, but he really didn't have the budget just to bring over a valet, and that was something that was kind of different at that time. There aren't very many promoters that used female managers or valets. It was just a different time period, and my dad really wasn't sold on that concept. So Adrian never really negotiated with my dad for Linda to be featured as a valet, and my dad, said, "Well, I can't pay her a lot." He paid Adrian his guarantee, and my dad wasn't even really thrilled with the idea that she'd be traveling in the vans with all the other male wrestlers. But to Linda's credit, she weathered all of that. And she was married to Adrian, and she was part of his show. And when she came here, she did an incredible job. She could work herself. She had worked in England, and she was great as a manager and a valet, and she could really handle herself. Like, not too many fans tested her because she could handle herself, male or female fans that might have gone after her, because she was used to get heat with Adrian, to either attack the baby faces that were selling while Adrian was distracting the referee, or distracting the ref, so Adrian could do a cheap shot or something. So she performed very well in her role. And I don't know, Adrian said she was only making like $25 a week, which wasn't true. I think she was probably making $75, maybe $100, which wasn't a lot. And I would agree that she deserved more than that. But at the time, my dad really just didn't have the budget for an additional manager, and he made it clear to Adrian, if you want to bring her on the road with you, if you have to be together and she can't stay at home while you go on the road trips, then that's fine. Then you kind of have to assume that burden yourself. And so Linda did travel with Adrian, and she was part of the shows, and Bruce incorporated her into his gimmick, basically, with Foley and Rosenblum, who managed Adrian. And she had incredible heat. Like, she actually I thought worked harder than Adrian in the ring, and she was a very good protector of him. So I liked Adrian and Linda very much, and they both had pretty good heat. I think Bruce got them over very well, in this role, as a heel worker who seemed to be gay or homosexual, and yet, and Linda might have been perceived as a valet, or I don't know, fans had different interpretations of it, I guess, of her in the ring, but she complimented him very well in the ring, and I wish she had been paid better. And I think it was just at the times, Stu just didn't have the budget, and really most promoters didn't have the mindset of using a female valet in the ring. But no offense against Adrian, but his work was quite limited in the ring. His offense was weak. He didn't like to sell or take a lot of bumps, and that's why he wasn't as successful with Stampede, as a lot of the others who came over from the UK, and that's why he didn't gel very well with Keith. And Keith basically just didn't give him very much in their matches, because Adrian's output in the ring just was not very strong, and Keith basically just looked after himself and the industry. And didn't sell or give Adrian very much. And I think Adrian's pretty bitter about that 40 years later.